What's up, everyone? Happy Friday and welcome to the game on Pax8 Live. It's been a couple weeks. We're super excited to be back. Bear with us as we deal with summer schedules and vacations and travel and all the craziness that will hit us over the summer. But we're here, we're back. We're going to be talking with Darren Mott, retired special agent from the FBI, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity divisions. Some really interesting conversation to come. But first, let's jump straight into the news. What's up, Matt?
Man, Dom, I have had a day.
I
I
saw
uh,
on
I got to
LinkedIn.
drive
A little
5
driving.
hours to pick up my case over here
Oh,
so that we could have this show, but I didn't want to miss this one. It was so good. But before we get Darren on, which if anybody's here, we are doing this as a bit of an AMA style. So if somebody will keep an eye on the YouTube comments, Claire, maybe have you kind of pop in if you can and let us know if anybody has an interesting question we want to field for Darren. So if you're here, get that YouTube page up. Let's get ready to ask questions of Darren Mott. He's got just a plethora of experience, and I'm ready to go. So let's go into the first news article. This one touches me pretty close to home. You've obviously heard it, but we now have two energy departments that have been potentially compromised through the Move It vulnerability, right, Dom? As we see here. So I want to ask you first, Dom. What are your initial thoughts on this? I mean, this is on the heels of SolarWinds with some interesting stuff
you
that's
know,
happened recently, and yeah. So what are your thoughts?
I, I I think back in our episode of Mackenzie, we kind of collectively nailed that this will be a long-running, terrible, ongoing story. And then you went and found several different organizations with Move It exposed. Um, and then obviously now it's the DOE. And for those of you that don't know, the DOE is not just dealing with coal versus gas versus wind energy. They're in charge of nuclear for the United States and much of the
Yep.
world. So this is a serious one, but uh, I mean, for Pete's sake, patch that thing or get rid of it, please.
Yeah.
You mentioned to
Yeah.
me that
Both
one
sides of
company
that.
who we probably won't name put theirs behind a WAF, which is an even better play if you have to keep it. Patch it, please.
Yeah. And on this Move It vulnerability, right? This patch it or have other compensatory safeguards and controls. But at the end of the day, I think it comes back to, and maybe I'll point fingers at ourselves as well as the federal government. There's just not a really good 2.1 being done here, right? As far as knowing what software you have and then knowing what data is on that in three and having it classified appropriately, separated appropriately. And so you have these things where if you don't know what's really good in 2.1, if you don't have an understanding of what software you're using, what's running, what things you own, you cannot be successful at 7. You can't. So you can't be successful at vulnerability management. You can't be successful at doing these patching things. So I would point this out as this is really just an endemic problem for all companies. And I don't say that to be, okay, then we shouldn't try. I say that to say that this is the reason that all of us have to be better, right? We shouldn't be seeing these vulnerabilities play out that way. That said, when it comes to nation states, when it comes to the Department of Energy, when it comes to U.S. federal government, you're likely to have had that play out for quite a while, as they did have access to these movement vulnerabilities for several ransomware gangs for about a year and a half, if I remember. Klopp said they've had access to some of these vulnerabilities. So, yeah, it remains to be seen how big this becomes. But Mackenzie and I and Dom definitely nailed it 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago when we said this is going to be big, and it seems to be escalating by the week for
Also,
sure.
for this one in particular, reevaluate your business case for having some weird file software like this running in your environment. Like a cloud solution probably exists. I mean, sure, if there's a business case, there's a business case, but reevaluate it and see if the business value is still coming out of having that particular
Agreed.
functionality. Because I think this is a very legacy way of doing things. And if you're not stuck with it, get rid of it.
I think you're actually hitting the nail on the head too, Dom, in the sense that a lot of what we're seeing is this commoditization of traditional IT and technology work, right? To some extent, the normal
Right.
plate spinning we talk about all the time. But if you're trying to figure out what the next step is, it's that advice of saying, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Client, let's sit down and review if you really still need this file share. Let's see what kind of business functions are having on it. Let's look at what the other options are. Let's look at what the benefits would be from a security perspective. Let's look at what the things that we should do here. So I definitely am
And probably
100%
from a
behind
business
that point.
perspective, like, man, you could do a lot in the
Yeah.
cloud with things like Power Automate and move this needle further for them from a business perspective. So always be having those
Add
conversations with your
layers of
customers.
DLP, add layers of inspection, all kinds of other things. Segmentation
Right.
from traditional infrastructural data. I mean, all of the things,
Right.
right, Dom? There's so many things that come into that play. Awesome. let's take a look at this next one because I know this next article, Don, was one that you kind of really
This
scratched your
this
head
one
on.
makes
So
me
why don't you
giggle.
run this one?
Um, well, this hits the nail on the head with the counterintelligence theme. Um, the headline says it all: U.S. military personnel receiving unsolicited, suspicious smartwatches. And if you read
Free
the article,
smartwatch.
some of them turned it on. It's the E4 mafia striking again, probably. But this is exactly what it sounds like. We don't know where they're coming from, and I'm not gonna attribute on our YouTube show, but yeah, if you get a random electronic device capable of doing Bluetooth and Wi-Fi type stuff that you didn't order, destroy it, right? Or in this case, I do think Army CID and counterintelligence are looking to collect these devices for intelligence purposes. But if you're not a service member and you get a random anything electronic in the mail, just get rid of it. Be my request. Destroy it without blowing up the battery.
Yeah.
But this is a really old school thing, right? Slip someone some physical thing. Back in the day in old school intelligence, it's more of some level of tracking device or listening bug. But some of the reports are saying somebody turned it on. It paired with their phone without their phone asking about it. It was getting on Wi-Fi networks. It's not a legitimate thing. Nobody's sending out free electronics to anyone. And if I don't even know, I think it blew my mind that they're getting turned on, but at the same time, it didn't. So pay attention for these things.
Hey, babe, you're
And
gonna have to ship that
yeah,
smartwatch back we just got. It's not good. Not good.
it's not a
No,
it's
but
not a good
joking
one.
aside, right? I mean, you see this play out where there's a valuable reason to get hardware assets that you control inside, around, or over a network, right? To some extent, and you've seen this play out before
Or
with
physical
war
space.
mailing. Yeah, yeah, or physical space, right? But remember the war mailing when there was an early
Yeah,
example of someone shipping a access point, basically probative type technology in a shipping room because they knew it would sit in the shipping room for 3 days because it was addressed to somebody that
right.
wasn't there, and then ultimately be returned to sender, right? And so it was a really cool exercise of this conversation of how do I inject something hardware with Wi-Fi and signals in gathering capabilities inside of an organization, and then get it back, right? So
And
this one's an
anecdotally, and
interesting one to
and
break out.
attached to this one, the DoD has banned any sort of smart wearable in any sort of sensitive arena. So anywhere around a skiff
I
or
can't
a,
wear my
or a
watch in a
security area
skiff.
base. Can't, no, or anywhere on the
Ugh,
Pentagon grounds. And what happened was Fitbit had this whole cool thing about democratizing access to cool jogging trails, right? Well, if you went at the time and looked at the map of the Pentagon, you would see where roving patrols drove around the Pentagon because they had their Fitbit on while they were roving the Pentagon grounds.
yeah,
So it was open source intelligence on the roving schedule of guards at the Pentagon. Like it was not good.
it's fair. I can't imagine why
Um,
that would be valuable at all.
no, useless. Yeah. So be cognizant of these things. Nobody's mailing you free electronics.
It's fair. And it's kind of that whole thing, right? My grandfather used to say the secret of life. What is the secret of life? And his answer was there's no such thing as a free lunch. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
similar situation here. All right, let's go on to our last article on this one, and we might even gain a little bit of time to speak with Darren. So we may get a little few more minutes on this one.
Wow.
This is another one. This isn't a surprise, DPRK or ROK, right? So North Korea using engineering, social engineering to enable hacking, and think tanks are saying basically, right? And they've been good at this for a long time, right? This all started. If you think it was funny, I was in Raleigh speaking for an MSP the other day, and a supervisory agent from the FBI was talking about early stage ransomware, early stage threat actors and nation state threat actors, and she brought up the North Korea hacking Sony conversation, right? So this is another play. They've always had a very active kind of reach out in that way. But what's unique about this one, to Dom, to you?
Honestly, there's not much unique about it. It's just uptrending again. This is very classic social media manipulation.
Yep,
So we could look at a lot of love based attacks probably coming out of this, but also there's the whole concept. And I'm not getting political here, but there's the whole concept of spreading misinformation on social media to drive an
sure.
outcome of some form,
We don't know anybody that
right?
could
And
talk about misinformation or any of that kind of stuff. I don't
right,
imagine.
right. So this is a very classic kind of attack. It's not the nerdy hackers movie attack. This is straight up playing on human brains to try to
Yep.
get them to do or reveal or give access to something. So it's just something to be cognizant about, and I think it's worth discussing with your client and prospect base about, hey, we talk about viruses, we talk about phishing emails. We don't talk about social media. It's a good opportunity to use this NSA joint alert to get it out there.
Yeah, and I get probably 5 or 6 a week requests to connect from somebody that has almost no profile, only has 4 or 5 connections and followers, usually a pretty Asian female, right? And it's usually with an anglicized name and a Harvard degree, and it's very easy to spot. You see them all the time. But what's really interesting about this, and I think the reason you'll see such a proliferation, is I was seeing some threat briefings recently talking about using, large language models of various sources and types to have the person that you're doing these love attacks with, these romance scams with, never ever actually talk to a real human. It's completely scripted from the very beginning. It's completely scripted from every single chat, the persona that's assumed based on the data they gathered automatically from the profile. And one of the other interesting things to note from a North Korea perspective is, maybe outside of this article, they've been one of the only nation states to actually use ransomware to fund their economy, right? To actually use
Right.
that as a methodology for how they get to make money. Well, romance scams are perfect for that, right? They're going to extract money on a constant basis at some level of scale, number of humans in the top, number of dollars out of the bottom, especially if you can get your marketing profile right, you can get the right person that has the right amount of
Right.
money, you can start to do those kind of selections. So I think social media is one of those giant kind of, I don't know, massive challenges that will get solved more and more over the next 5 to 10 years. But today, I do a talk that I do in front of eighth graders called "When Grandma Ain't Grandma," and what I've done is had these eighth graders find the kill chain place where they could have stopped this attack. And when we discuss it, I took Facebook, I created a profile, I took a picture of grandma from you, I put it in and made the profile, and I reached out and said, "Hey, Sally, I'm actually lost access to my Facebook profile. Some hacker kicked me out. Here's my new profile." And then you meet with them and go, "What's your address?" And it was so funny because this one little girl stands up, and I was giving away Amazon gift cards, so it does help to get participation. But I asked her, I was like, "How could you have stopped it?" She goes, "Couldn't I have just called grandma?" I was like, "Yes, you could have. I award you one Amazon card." But anyways, social media
Sometimes it's the
attacks.
simple
I think.
things, and I'm gonna steal the time back that we thought we were gonna get, because literally today I had a coworker ask me like, "How do I know that this Facebook Marketplace buyer I'm chatting with is legit?" It's like, well,
Oh, they're
there's a
usually
lot of
not.
things you could do, but one of the easiest things is reverse image search their profile picture because it's not unique, right? You're gonna find 52 profiles with that profile picture. But another piece of advice I've used is ask them what the weather is, and if they give you exactly what the forecast says, especially in Colorado because it's never the same ever, if they give you exactly what the forecast says, they're lying, right? So just
It's fair.
think outside the box. And if you're chatting with someone on social media and you're not absolutely 1,000% sure that's them, just stop chatting with them, right? Like
Well,
it's as easy as that.
we're gonna poke Darren with this question after we come back from some just
Yes.
amazing words from Robin talking about EU regulations.
So let's talk about regulations and compliance. And there's something coming. It's not here yet, it's coming. 2024. The EU is formally upgrading their NIS 2.0, that's NIS, to cybersecurity requirements. And you could say that it's the cybersecurity equivalent of GDPR. And they've widened the scope of who it impacts. And again, we know that the EU tends to set the standard in terms of regulations. So what's happening, what they're responding to is the increase in cybersecurity issues. They're responding to the lay of the land where the bad guys, the bad actors, are really busy. Their schemes are becoming quite sophisticated, and they're costing companies and governments and individuals a lot of money, just destroying lives. In one episode, I talked about when industries don't self-regulate, governments will. That's just how it works. And cybersecurity, we all know it's important. We all know the bad guys are out there. We all know they're a risk. And yet, there are so many companies that will still operate with their head in the cloud. Not their business in the cloud, their head in the cloud, as if this is not a reality they need to deal with. So now we got to deal with another regulation. You want to play in the EU scope? They added digital providers to the list. It's not essential. There's essential, core businesses. You think of your utilities and different things, your banks or whatever. But they added in the area of important, they added cyber services, online services, digital providers. So that's going to touch a lot of businesses that the 1.0 version didn't touch. Now, if you're an MSP and you've got a certain amount of income and you're serving a certain amount of business and you're touching certain sectors, guess what? This could impact you. And what they're asking is not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. But if you're operating in a business where you're doing the bare minimum, like just squeaking by with security or not even doing the minimum, this is going to be a problem because they like to find people, and they don't find you just based on your local revenue. They want a piece of your global revenue. So they're raising the bar. And one of the things they added, which I thought was very interesting, they added API security. API security. How many companies integrate API into their businesses? That's huge. And how many companies actually think about security controls when they're using third-party APIs or they're creating APIs for third parties to plug into them? So that's like a whole new dimension. APIs are just part of the digital landscape, but we have to wait for somebody to come and tell us that we need to be doing that level of security in that space. Well, apparently, yes, we do. So, and we'll say like 2024. I remember when GDPR was coming in scope and, people are thinking, well, it's not going, we have a couple of years, and they're going to wait. They're going to wait until we have a year, and they're going to wait until we've got 6 months, and then all of a sudden, hey, now you're supposed to be compliant, and nothing was done to build that bridge, right? To bridge between being non-compliant to being compliant. So here's the thing. Haven't we learned our lesson? Haven't we learned that it's better to adopt early than to wait to the last minute? I hope we've learned that lesson. I know from my perspective, we don't wait until it's a law and you're non-compliant. Now there's risk of fines and upsetting clients and just having unnecessary burdens on the company. We don't wait. 2024 is not that far away. Time is like speed of light. We're at the speed of light. A year goes by so fast because we're coming up to the half-year point of 2023, right? And then we're going to be at Christmas, and then we're going to be in 2024. And the end of 2024, this needs to be in place. So my recommendation is go do the research. And even if you think you can, on a technicality, say, well, we don't meet the income threshold, or we can redefine our business model so it excludes us, don't do that. Don't do that. Just level up. It's good practice. It makes sense. Cybersecurity is not going away. And just like with GDPR, it's a popcorn effect. The EU does it, then the next country's going to do it, and then the next country, and the next region, and let's just do what we need to do. Let's do what we need to do. Level up. It's not that hard. Security and compliance truly should be part of your business model.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the game on Pax8 Live.
All right, Dom. I guess I heard your auditors
Mini CTF, capture the flag. How's that acronym? Did I get a buzz?
There you
That's
go.
an acronym. That's perfect. Well played, Mr. Morgan.
There we go.
If you're really interested in just the nerdy bits of home security, definitely check out those resources. That was a huge thunder.
You know, sometimes you get chaos from thunder and you just wind up breaking the third wall.
I
Oh,
thought we were
sorry.
going to talk about the
no,
charity beard
you know
shave
what?
because you still need
That's
some more
forgettable.
money. Yeah.
I was trying not to be the shameless plug guy, but it's also the guy that can't
I'll
read the show
shamelessly
notes.
plug the beard shave.
Yeah.
So,
All right, awesome.
So,
Let's
so
kick
check
over
it
to the
out.
beard
Let's
shave.
roll the beard shave. Yeah.
I wanted to share this because I've got a Beardy Award being made for the Pax8 Studios team, but that was for being such an awesome part of my beard shaving charity that we raised $202,667 by shaving this stupid beard off for charity. This is going to be amazing. Oh, sorry. Did I say too much? All right. Well, I'm going to get the
Said
hook
too
in.
much.
Thanks for being
You're
here.
gonna get the
Click the
hook.
buttons. Thank y'all.
That
Dom,
was
I
awesome.
guess that's our 1 year anniversary. Does that mean you have to take me out for a
craziness.
steak dinner?
No, I think 1 year is more cheeseburgers. Yeah, well, 2 years we'll
cheeseburger
do
is the
steak.
first year. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's commensurate with the amount of income coming in, as you would wager for
Yes.
the show. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah.
No, I am so stoked about this episode in particular for a lot of reasons. Just in general, I've followed Darren for a while, and he's just crushing it from being out there and saying the stuff that everybody wants to hear and is accurate. And maybe some people don't
Ironically,
wanna
he
hear
may
it.
have
It's fine,
followed us
but-
for longer, though. I mean, it's entirely
true.
possible.
That's true.
Yeah.
Might already know a lot of things about us, and so we don't want to talk about 2006 through 11 if we can avoid it. It's just generally not a great idea. I'll tell that story one day. But anyways, let's bring on Darren Mott, the Cyber, CYBUR guy, and I'm going to start by asking you, why Cyber guy? You've said this to me before, but I'd love to hear it.
It's a great question. I should say I follow all bearded bald guys on LinkedIn whenever I find them. So it's been a long time following you. So I appreciate that. So
Even baby-faced
cyber,
bald guys.
right, exactly. So cyber CYBUR, when I was coming up with how am I going to brand this podcast when I retired from the FBI. When you join the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, everything is short in the bureau for we say bureau. So the FBI, we say bureau. So when you get to your first office, you get your assigned car, which we call our BU car, and your gun is your BU gun, and your phone is your BU phone. So when I was coming up with branding, I said, well, I can just take cyber, and it will still sound like cyber. It'll just be spelled differently. And that's why every time you see
Fair.
that the BU is capitalized in whatever I write.
Yeah. I was wondering that. So that's a great answer as to why that is. And so one of the things I'd love for you to do, just for our viewers watching and for people watching it over the course of the next few weeks, explain a little bit about your background. Just tell it story style of how'd you get started and what was your career like in the FBI?
Sure. So originally I was a high school teacher. No one starts off in the FBI. Everybody starts off somewhere. Either you usually think you're usually a lawyer or an accountant or a cop or somebody in the military. I was a high school teacher. And that's a whole another story for perhaps another day. But I got in the Bureau after 7 years of teaching high school. And I was fortunate enough to be assigned to the first cyber squad in the Charlotte field office. It was one of only 16 cyber squads at the time. This was 1999, 2000 timeframe. There was no cyber division in the FBI. All the cyber stuff was kind of run by different divisions, either the criminal division or the counterterror. They really didn't know where to put cyber stuff because they didn't understand it. And part of that was I don't have a computer science degree, but growing up, my first computer I ever played with was this huge banking computer that my mom was programming on in 1977. It was a big mainframe computer and did all sorts of stuff. And I was fascinated by computers from there. So I always had a computer insight background. So kind of self-taught myself stuff. So when I got in the Bureau, they needed cyber folks, especially at least in these new offices. Got to Charlotte, ran some cases there, had a 5-year undercover targeting the wear scene. For those who remember the wear scene back in mid 2000s.
I meant no.
Yep,
no,
what
I
are you
have no
talking
idea
about?
what
What's
you're
the wear
talking
scene?
about, Darren.
Exactly. What
Wares.
does that mean? Right. Yeah. So took down six major wares distributing groups, did search warrants in 40 different US cities and 9 different countries, and no one really did any time. But we put a Band-Aid on that gunshot wound for at least a week, so that was good. Then went to FBI headquarters, ran some national program stuff at the headquarter level, worked with the Russians. which basically involved going to Russia saying, hey, we know you have these hackers in your country. Here's evidence. We would love to arrest one. And they said, yes, that's a very good idea. We go lunch now, drink vodka. We take you to the museum. You walk around. That was pretty much what we did every time we went to Russia. So did that. Then went to a
Thanks
field
for the
office and ran my own
falsetto and the
cyber-
voice too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got multifaceted. So went and ran my own squad in Cleveland, and then got pulled in back to FBI headquarters to embed a cyber-focused unit in the counterintelligence division. They started realizing, obviously, that nation-state actors were becoming a huge issue. In 2005, the Time magazine had the report on Titan Rain, which they'd been looking at for a couple of years, Chinese nation-state sponsored hacking stuff. And obviously the Russians have been doing it. You mentioned the watches earlier. They buckshot Yankee in 1998. The Russian intelligence service is dropping thumb drives in parking lots in military bases, and people picking up the thumb drive saying, ooh, hey, free porn. Let me go plug this in, see what it is. So, bad things happen. So I did that, created this new unit, and then ultimately came back into the field as a counterintelligence supervisor in Huntsville, Alabama, which you probably wouldn't think, what is in Huntsville, Alabama? Where Redstone Arsenal is the Army's basically strategic and ballistic military center. This is where the Apollo 13 or the Apollo rocket was built here. Werner von Braun settled all of his engineers after World War II in this area. Yep. And so all of the rockets that we have were designed and built here. So this is a huge area for infiltration. It has the second largest research park in the country, 400 clear defense contractors, the largest concentration of PhDs, and according to USA and World Report, the best place to live in America. Well, so there's that.
This is probably a great time for the audience out there, because you've said some things that help set the stage. You've said, I was in counterintelligence, and I think you said, hey, we're near a lot of data, we're near a lot of invention, we're near a lot of cleared contractors who are working in the DIB or Defense Industrial Base. And I want to ask this: what is counterintelligence? Like, if you were to define this, we're trying to explain this to your peers or to colleagues of mine. What is counterintelligence? Help me understand that.
Really, that's a great question. And actually, I've argued for years that companies need to think about protecting their information from a counterintelligence perspective. So if I back that up a little bit, what that means is if you take a look at nation-state sponsored actors, or what we like to call the APTs, right, the advanced persistent threats, then they are, thank you. They are using intelligence collection mechanisms in the cyber world to do what they used to do in the human world. So if you go back, to one of the oldest professions beyond prostitution is spying, right? And so we've got,
and sometimes correlatable in history.
Sometimes. Yeah, absolutely.
Oftentimes.
Sure. So, the China, the Russia, the North Koreas have looked at, okay, we can still do our human intelligence collection in New York and Washington, where the embassies are, but we can use all of these other assets, and we can do the exact same data mining intelligence collection through cyber means. So what counterintelligence is how do you stop that from happening? There are techniques you can use that either redirect the bad actors to somewhere else, give them false information. There's a whole host of different tools in the counterintelligence toolbox that can be very easily transported into the cyber world as part of a cybersecurity policy that you can use to better protect your information.
So to put it very simply, it's
I always put it as spy versus spy. Like you have intelligence, right? And then you have counterintelligence, and they're pitted against each other. It's very much spy versus spy. I was intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the ways you can deal with it would be things like blocking out their ability to get data, right, by stopping it. But also, it's more usually surreptitious, I'm assuming, Darren. Is it more giving bad data, misdirection, things like that? It's not usually direct action of stopping it. Is that a fair way to say it?
Right. It's all of those things, right? So there's a lot of, the FBI actually has a program that they use to help private companies called the Illicit Data Loss Exploitation Program. And basically what that means is you take counterintelligence mechanisms and you incorporate it in your business, like creating, let's say you create a folder in your network, and it's the only people that know that folder exists is the CEO, the CIO, and the security person, right? You purposely set that up. You put a lot of triggers on it so that if anyone goes into that folder, and you may put bogus information in there, and you may call it our secret sauce project, crown jewel, whatever. And if anyone goes in there, you have a problem. Either someone's in your network looking for your intellectual property, or maybe you have an insider problem, because the issue is not so much just the hackers from the outside coming in, right? We put a lot of protections in place to stop that. But what about the human piece? So let's, I'll give you a perfect example. We were looking at a case 10 years ago where there was a telecommunication company that put all their crown jewels in an air-gapped network or air-gapped computer in a room that was locked and had specific access controls, but the walls were blue. But we had information, let's say, from another 3-letter agency that there was communications where a Chinese handler was telling someone else in the US, hey, I need you to go to that blue room and get access to that computer. So they knew the room was blue and they knew that they had to get in to get whatever the data was. So they're now using human mechanisms along with the cyber part because they were in the network and they couldn't get to it. So they had to send a human to that. So you got both of those two things occurring. And most companies don't think about blending those two things together and looking at both of those threats simultaneously.
What did the blue room do for you in that response? Help me understand what the next step was in that case. Was there an effort to change the color of the room, set up another room and catch the threat actor, or is it just, am I dreaming too much into the movie?
In this case, yes, yeah, in this, yeah, there was no big takedown. In this case, it was just a matter of going to the company saying, hey, look, first, someone's reading your information in your network. So we had to start there. So there was a cyber intrusion in this company. I had to look for that. But then they had to at least know that, are you suddenly getting visitors that you weren't necessarily expecting? And are you, what is your access control to your building? There's actually an FBI counterintelligence division created a movie called The Company Man, which is a true story of the Chinese trying to infiltrate a company in the Midwest that created building insulation. And the whole program has to go with how they tried to recruit an engineer. They drove out to a production facility and basically walked into the building and started taking pictures of the machines and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, there's ample evidence of this activity going on, and just companies just needing to be aware that it's not just it's not just hackers, right? I mean, or cyber bad actors. That's what I call them. I don't say hacker. I say cyber bad actors. My particular term.
I'm a hacker. I identify as a hacker at least. Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, sure, those, and that's what everybody thinks about. Well, okay, if someone's going to hit me with ransomware. Well, the nation state guys, if they get in your system, they're going to be there for a while. SolarWinds was a nation state sponsored attack, and they were in there for a year before anybody figured out bad stuff was going on.
Yeah, and some believe even potentially before that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that this brings me to then, Darren, is when you're talking about MSPs, managed service providers, we've seen APT groups or advanced persistent threat groups in the past attack MSPs, especially in the enterprise space. I think APT 14 was known for it. But you're seeing MSPs now, in my definition, right, serving the SMB, the small to mid-sized business market, driving that world. They have 42% by some reports and 50% or so by some reports of the GDP under their capabilities, right? Which means that there's going to be tangential access. There's going to be tangential impact to other companies that are having certain pieces of data. And if I could get access to that many of those companies, I'll find a way into some of the others. So that said, when you're thinking about being an MSP, what kind of advice would you give around counterintelligence for an MSP about them and their own users and their own world? And then the second question we'll get into here in a little bit is more about their clients. And I'll tell a quick story. So an MSP that we all know and love, Dom and I, in fact, they don't exist as that entity anymore. They're a much larger MSP, but they had threat actors targeting their engineers. They had threat actors targeting people with cell phone, on text messages, and emails at private emails, to try to elicit one of them to come and be that person, right? Get access to the blue room, in your words, in that regard. So we saw that play out. How does one deal with that from a counterintelligence perspective? And what should MSPs be doing to protect themselves by using counterintelligence techniques?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to recognize, well, if you have to think about what is the data I have, right? Let's use the whole CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. All right. So you've got control of all that information. So what does a bad actor want? Who are your customers? If your customers is the Subway shop, maybe they want, cyber bad actors who are criminals are going to want your financial information. But if your client is a clear defense contractor and they're storing their, whatever it is they build in your network, all right, how is that network, how is that information held? Where is it? I mean, ideally it's going to be,
or even in their own
right?
network, right? And
Right.
even in their own network, of which I have access to, right, in that definition, because MSPs don't usually keep much of that data. But to your point, I got access to it, right? So yeah.
Right. And I think about it, I mean, if I'm a nation state actor, I'm going to map out all the affiliations that a company that I want to target has. their MSPs, their legal firm, their accounting firm. Where's the weakest link I can get into? The MSP may not be the weak link because they've at least put protections in place to identify illicit activity, to see that motion of data where it's going from point A to point B, ideally. And so if you are looking at your client from a counterintelligence perspective, it all comes down to what is it I need to protect and how am I going to protect it? And you have to kind of start there because you can't cover it all. But then you have to look at, okay, what are they using for their email system? Are they aware, am I providing them enough threat intelligence to know what the threats are? Let's take Move It as a perfect example, right? You guys mentioned that earlier. When that threat intelligence came out, if you're an MSP, did you take that threat intelligence and pass it out to all of your clients? I assume they did, most did, but I'm sure some didn't, right? They think that's on the company's requirement. So all that, threat intelligence is a huge thing, especially cyber threat intelligence, because it's constantly changing and constantly evolving. And that's all part of the counterintelligence narrative. How do I use that intelligence to then protect myself from that? The part of the problem really is, let's be honest, the nation state actors are better funded, they're more patient, and they're better trained at getting at the data than the defenders are of necessarily fighting them off. So you almost have to, I've shown this picture of a threat pyramid periodically on my LinkedIn. It's a cyber threat pyramid. And at the very top is the nation state actor, the level 6 actor, and the amount of defense you have to have in place, I'd be willing to bet that most MSPs don't have or don't think of a counterintelligence capability. If you're not thinking of a counterintelligence capability to stop those actors, you're not going to stop those actors. So you almost have to put things in place that redirect them to where you don't want that. You want them to go, and
like
they don't want to go.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that depth.
Help me understand.
Well, we were chatting about this before when we had John and Mackenzie on, and he was talking about that gap between intrusion and detonation, right? Like we're having that right of boom conversation, and just to the left of boom, right? Threat actor enters the environment. They're going to make some level of noise figuring out what their next step is, right? And I think at a general SMB attack, and this isn't even just nation state, this is run of the mill ransomware crew, is going to make some level of noise trying to understand what they've just gotten into, right? It could be as simple as a ping, but it's probably going to be some level of scanning or some level of opening folders, some level of understanding what system they just got onto and what does it have line of sight to. And if you can catch that noise, man, you're ahead of a lot. And that feels very counterintelligence-y to me, right? Looking for the signal through the noise.
Yeah, I'd say let's go back to what I talked about first, that funky folder you're going to set up, right? You talked about a honeypot map, but it really doesn't need to be that depth. It's just a honey folder. And then what I would suggest from companies that have intellectual property, they're concerned about being stolen, because you have to also look at what do the actors want. Korea doesn't really give a crap about intellectual property. They want, like you mentioned earlier, they want ransomware so they can fund the regime. That's it. And maybe information on South Korea. Correct. Exactly right. Russia wants geopolitical information and stuff on gas and oil and things of that nature. China wants everything. I used to tell a story when I did presentation. We haven't even talked about Iran. Yeah. I used to tell a joke that how do you know who hacked you? If your network, if your room you're in is a network, right? And you come in tomorrow and everything is gone in that room, China was there. If you come in tomorrow and this little USB is gone, Russia was there. And if you come in tomorrow, it's on fire, Iran was there. So that's how you know who was in your network.
That's fair. That's spoken truly, I think, actually, as you lay it out. That's fantastic. So back to this honey folder concept. My thought would be presumably you'd want to trigger anytime anything touched that, right? That would be the concept, is to have this almost instant first response of saying, if something touches this, isolate it, right? I think that's kind of maybe the concept. Or do you want to take direct action? My gut says yes in that situation.
You can go a couple ways. So you can, if you're worried about an insider threat, you actually have a human insider, right? Someone's been turned. Someone's actually looking to steal information internally to your system. I'll give you an example of a case we had here. It was an engineer. She was of Chinese descent, but she was an American citizen by this time, married to a Vietnamese engineer, and they'd had been engineering for the Army for 30 years. She would get other people to bring her TS level information, saying, hey, I want to join your project. Can you bring me something so I can take a look at it? And then she would go pass it off.
Top secret, TS. Just wanted to get us.
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry,
Top
go
secret.
get the
Oh, sorry.
acronym.
That was an acronym. Apologies. Right. So, yeah. So she was actually a full on insider. She was working with the Chinese inside the company. And you may have, but if you're worried about like, is someone external in the network, that's still an insider. So if it's the insider that's physically there, you want to say, okay, so they're in there. Let's now watch what they're doing, more information. What I would argue, if it's an external internal, so that's a really bad phraseology, but if that's what it is,
I'm with you though.
What information can you put in that folder that they'll take thinking it's important? I mean, if I'm a company and I create the next generation tank, I have got versions of that tank that just didn't make it. Throw all that crap in there. And encrypt it, do all sorts of bad stuff. Say this is version 75, and this is the one we're going to sell.
Put the business end in backwards. It's a real bad design.
Exactly. And we actually tried that here in Huntsville. We'd worked with a company and created this, well, this is probably bad timing for this example, but it was a submersible device that if China had stolen it, would cost them $3 trillion to build, and it would sink. Right. So, but we had ITAR issues, and it was a lot of governmental issues not putting that up. Anyway, but the point being, you put all this data in this fake file and let them take it, because they're going to run cycles, because they have to translate it. The people who steal it don't look at it. They just steal it and pass it to the intelligence group that does the analysis. So give them stuff that burns through their cycles. So they figure, well, this stuff is crap. You got the wrong stuff, you moron. Right. And then by then, hopefully you've seen what they did, and you've taken protective means there. So it's things like that. That's really just a false flag is all that is, kind of.
What's interesting about that is I hadn't really correlated the point of trying to damage the organization from that, right? The ingestion of this data damaged that organization to this many analyst hours, this many moments to have to wait on having that data, this many more moments for me to discover and take action. But I hadn't really correlated the next step, which is now I have their IPs, now I have their TTPs or Internet Protocol IP addresses. I guess let's call that an acronym, right? TTPs or techniques, tactics, and practices we also covered. But you now have these information points that you can now start to take action on. Suddenly that IP doesn't have access to your network. Suddenly that IP doesn't have the ability to do certain things. Certain TTPs now have YARA rules and blocks. And I think that's yet another recursive acronym. I think that's what YARA stands for. So we're going to go with YARA for the ding. But anyways, I digress. But you're going to be able to put in defenses in place off of that bad information. And I hadn't really thought, like, a lot of the block lists and things that you're doing, if you as an MSP aren't using block lists, if you aren't putting in normal known threat intelligence and blocking those IPs, those are the result of some of this counterintelligence. Those are the result of black point gathering data and different sources in the intelligence community where they can, sharing intel and information back across. But, what other kind of common practices? So we talked about a honey folder. We've dug in a little bit about a honey pot. What other common practices would you recommend around cyber for counterintelligence and using some of your former background? Put you on the spot.
What the one I would love to do myself is to, and there's been some success in this that we can't talk about here, but actually engaging with actors online, because where they hang out. I mean, a lot of these guys have places that they hang out. And if you could engage in that conversation, the problem is you have to speak their language, right? If you're looking to target a Chinese guy, you got to know how to speak Chinese. So you kind of need a Chinese speaker. But if you're a company and you can hire a native Chinese speaker and do some offensive because now we're getting into offensive counterintelligence where you're actually engaging.
And maybe even GPT's your weapon there. Right? Maybe even something like large language models make that translative to traditional spoken Chinese easier. Is that not going to be close enough to the
maybe? I don't know if you'd get the accent versions. I was talking to a friend of mine here in Alabama. Like Alabama has a very distinct,
for sure.
How do I say this? Way to talk. So you can't say a
colloquialism of language.
Yeah. Colloquialism. Thank you, and say, hey, please write me a letter to send to such ever that sounds like I'm from Alabama. I mean, I guess unless it's got to end with roll tide and something like that, but whatever. But ChatGPT is going to be very hard to give you the dialect for the area of China that particular individual works, and that might be complicated. But I mean, there are ways to engage. Again, it's killing the cycles, right? It's making it harder for them to get to what their ultimate goal is. So you're now engaging in conversation. It might be the best part is double agent. Double agent operation would be great, where but part of this is now we talk a lot about no one does cyber intelligence. I mean, cyber awareness, or not, at least not enough. Nobody's doing counterintelligence awareness, right? So being able to talk to your employees and say, look, if anybody is contacted for out of the blue for a job, and it turns out, it's some Chinese company wants you to consult for them, come see us and then work with us to take that job and start to build and steal those TTPs that way. Get out of the cyber realm of it and go back to the human realm of it. So that's a little more complicated, but I'd love to see companies try to work that angle. Part of it is the FBI will argue you should work with us with that, and maybe that's the case, but I don't see a problem with a company trying to be proactive and saying, hey, if you get approached by a Chinese-focused company for a job for consulting, take it and work with us. And then they need to share that information with the FBI, who can then work with other
Would that be an
three-letter
IC3 type
agencies.
play, you think? You think that would be
No,
the
not
Net Crime
not yet.
Consortium or ICC? Or
Ooh,
would it
the
be something
huge
else?
thunder's back.
There's the thunder. You can't keep calling up these huge thunders, Dom. Stop seeding the clouds, man. This isn't cool.
Man.
No.
Oh,
So
yeah,
IC3 is more for criminal stuff. So you'd have to go to a local field office. Go to your local field office and say, hey, I've got this engineer. And this is what the company, this is kind of what the case was. We got this guy. He's been approached to be a consultant. They'll work with you. It basically becomes an undercover operation with your person. So that is a great way. I mean, talk about intelligence gathering. The problem then we get into is sharing of that intelligence becomes very problematic, because all that information becomes classified. It's within the FBI holdings, and they're not exactly going to write reports to share with everybody. So that makes that there's fine lines.
Is that part of the problem, Darren? I didn't mean to make this salacious, but is that part of the problem? Is this walling of intelligence a problem in the United States?
Oh yeah, and I'm saying it's not even just like counterintelligence. I'm talking cyber intelligence. This
Straight
is what
up
pisses me. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm not supposed to.
No, you're good. You can do whatever you want. You're you.
So when let's take, so here I'm gonna jump on a hobby horse here, and I apologize. Get ready for the ding, because I'm about to give it the CSRB.
Okay. Consumer safety.
I know. Cybersecurity Review Board. The Cybersecurity Review Board, which is supposed to be like the NTSB for cyber incidents. Okay, they did SolarWinds. Has there been anything since SolarWinds? Because they've done nothing since SolarWinds. And they're supposed to be this big.
Other than the Wells notices, did you guys see this? I'll take just a second on my own hobby. Did you guys see the Wells notices that were given out yesterday? Or familiar with the Wells notice process? So in an enterprise that's publicly traded, the SEC must file these Wells notices with anyone they plan to bring charges against in the near future. And they issued Wells notices against the company SolarWinds a year ago, but they've now issued them to the CEO, the CISO, and former other members of the board and executive team that are there or not, stating, we may be pressing prosecutorial charges against you in the near future. So anyways, back to your point of SolarWinds, we're seeing some interesting things in the legal side, but maybe nothing in the CSRB side that you spoke of, right? Is kind of the point. I don't know if you're
right.
I want to get you back on that train.
You see Yeah, no, you always see the front end of the incident, right? This incident occurred. This ransomware hit this particular entity, and it's $4 million, and they had this much. Okay, how'd they get in? Can someone tell me that? Can we just have a basic information on how'd they get in? What the email looked like? It wasn't an email. What, did someone go to a bad website? What's the mode of entry? And there's never that post-mortem. And you've probably seen me say this a lot. Where's the post-mortem on this? Because that would help everybody. But we never see it on anything. And so, that is the biggest. So, and you're right, going back to your original question, the protection of intelligence is problematic because the government overclassifies everything. I mean, everything gets classified. If we had a case, if we had a secret level case that had to do with a spy, and all we did was drive by their house to ensure the car was in the driveway, we would document that on a form. That would be secret. I mean, I'm sorry, but there's no technique or source there that you're really giving up by making that. But that's just how
here's data.
Right. Right, exactly. Not even that. Yeah. So I think that's a huge problem, is being able to share all of it. There's a lot of information within the intelligence community that can go to help companies understand methodologies, like you said, TTPs of how they're getting in. But the problem is they don't They won't share it. They can't declassify it. They won't declassify it. There's no will to do it. And people have said, well, you know, and you always hear the FBI director says it, the CISA director says it, every director of every three-letter agency, public-private sector sharing initiatives. They've been saying that since 1997 when InfraGard was formed. No one's sharing anything. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think industry itself needs to build its own. I mean, you have ISACs, but they don't talk to each other. I mean, they are what they are. But I think you need really someone needs to come up with a way to collect all this data, both cyber and counterintelligence wise, right? Each way, identify what it is, and then share it to all these industries to say, okay, here's what we see. Protect yourself from it, because I think that would go a long way to. I mean, how long did it take for the MOVE It stuff to come out? And then where was that shared? So there was a CISA report, right? CISA, FBI, UK, the Australian, the whole Five Eyes system got in place. Yeah. Here's a big report. Who read it? Who saw it? You know, where was it shared? Who knows?
Yeah, I know the city of Indianapolis certainly did not read it because they still had to move its server 5 weeks later.
The federal government, apparently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, fair enough. And I think
it's probably somewhere on Intel link buried in there. You know, if you can get in there.
Do you think some of this burden shifts up to these larger providers? I mean, does some of this burden of managing intelligence and counterintelligence in general move up the Microsoft stack, move up the AWS stack, move up the massive MSP and service provider stack? Is that the way we try to solve this in your mind?
Yeah, I think if someone took the reins and said, look, we are really going to dive into what counterintelligence is and what it means for business, right? You do have you have not counter espionage. There's a word for it. It's business counterintelligence, which is legal, where you're trying to learn information about your competitors in a legal mechanism. There's actually a whole organization called Business Intelligence Professionals or something. They have a whole code of conduct. But anyway, there needs to be some kind of centralized entity that says, okay, we're going to take this counterintelligence panel and create what it means for the private sector, because these are not exactly methodologies that are specific and special just to law enforcement and the intelligence community. It's simple things we've already talked about, but someone needs to kind of collate that and educate it out, saying here's things you can do and here's what's permissible and here's what's legal under the law. I mean, there's a reason we don't hack back into other countries. So
today. I mean, there's been discussion today. Yeah, I guess you said something and the lightning and thunder went off at Dom's house, right? So you got to watch out.
Just setting the mood, man. You know, it's a very spooky conversation.
Well, and I think you've called out something important in my mind. If I am a nation state trying to fight another nation state, it behooves me quite well to create things for the adversary to wear down their resources. It's usually very targeted upon me versus non-targeted upon me. But I think there's still value in less sophisticated threat actors that are in the 5s and the 4s and the 3s receiving some counterintelligence at the business level. It wouldn't look quite the same as at a nation state level, right? Like creating a false ship and having them follow that might be a little bit outside of that space. But when you're talking about small to mid-sized business in that market that are fighting the opportunistic attackers like DPRK that are wanting monetary gain, other things like that, I still think there's a play for counterintelligence. In fact, one of the things that went really well was we did, in fact, with this MSP, they asked their engineers to say, yes, I do want to participate. What are the next steps? And they got an email, and then they got other text messages, and they got other information that they all shared through their field office and through an IC3 type report, but through the field office in Denver, they're able to share that information. And so I think to your point, what are those interesting and unique veins where business can still benefit directly from counterintelligence in that SMB and MSP? And I think definitely hit on one with the canary folders. I think there's ways to do that. I think in the same way, you might spin up a MOVE IT server and just to see what kind of data you can start adding to your block list, right? And I think those type of collections are also quite valid. In fact, every time I spin up, well, maybe I'm saying too much, but I got a cease and desist from Microsoft the other day for one of my websites, but for my evil Genix hacking infrastructure. But everything that scans me on that infrastructure, I put an auto block in for. Yeah, go ahead, Darren.
Here's a simple thing. If I was a company, here's what I would do. I would hire 25 engineer level people who don't exist and create LinkedIn profiles for them.
Hell yes. And that's a nugget right there.
Funnel them with all sorts of stuff to create all sorts of things about how awesome they were. I would work with other companies to have them have 25 engineers, have them all friend each other,
so cool.
Have them all share their stuff and create this huge, you know, basically it's a false
fake
identity
set of humans
profile
that are just
LinkedIn,
a shield.
Right.
Yeah, they're a shield.
And just
Yeah,
wait for them
100%.
to be contacted, and actually create
Yeah.
it so that they're like disgruntled. Oh no, jobs suck today, man. I got to find
I
somewhere. I
hate
got to
this
find
guy. That
somewhere
Matt
else.
guy's so loud and cuts people off.
Right.
What a jerk. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They're making
That
me
is
grow a
probably the
beard.
biggest nugget out of this, Darren. Real quick, like genuinely, if you did that, there's other ancillary benefits. Even if you weren't doing something active ex post facto, even if you weren't doing something with that data when they're contacted, you are definitely putting out a lot of fake probes that you're monitoring that wouldn't be your employees that are summarily in that same frustration, right? And so you would
Mhm.
have the ability to sprinkle in other personas that would be that canary, right? I mean, everybody knows what a canary
Right.
is. If they don't, let's go back into it. When you walked into a mine and you had a little canary in the lantern, the reason was canaries died faster through inhalation of poisonous gases than we do. And so if the canary's dead, you're next. You need to move, right? And so when
Run.
we think about canary folders, yeah, anyways, and honeypots and such, but it's almost like
That
creating
wasn't
those
Claire's
canary
favorite
identities.
analogy, just so you know. That was
No,
That's
she
odd.
doesn't like dead birds. Is that the challenge, or geez. but genuinely, that's almost like creating canary identities. I love that concept. I would, now that I look back in the iconic days, I'd have made 40 fake iconic employees, and I would have made some ability to watch those things from an API perspective and see who's reaching out and communicating. Because you will have a lot of superfluous normal activity, but you'll certainly catch those 5 or 6 profiles I talked about where it's a foreign national that's asking me to help out with a program or a project or get hired.
I got one yesterday. She was I got one yesterday. She went to college in Korea, but she lived in Miami, and her name was Jasmine Maldonado, but she spelled Jasmine Jazzmin. And I said, look, like it's not the Hispanic way to spell Jasmine. I'm not gonna lie to you, but that was probably a first tell for me.
Well, and the Maldonado would have been a very interesting surname for Korea too, as a point.
Well, I said that too. I get a lot of Maldonados at the Korean design school in Seoul.
Yeah.
Do you?
I think the biggest takeaway I'd put though, and the advocation is, how do you start thinking the way your adversary is thinking, and how do you turn that into a way to give you a benefit? That's probably the biggest thought exercise. If I was doing this as an MSP, is okay. What are they thinking?
I would take a smaller
they
nugget,
want to get into my
and we covered this a while back, and one of them was you're going to collect a lot of cyber intelligence as an MSP, especially as you mature your practice and you start to understand what's happening in your managed world. Take that information and share it back out publicly to your customers, right? That is probably the most powerful piece of marketing you could create. And say, hey, we saw this threat actor do this thing. They use these techniques. Your customers don't know what all of it means, but the amount of demonstration you're doing by showing we're on top of this new threat we're encountering and we're collaborating about it and we're discussing it, that's hugely powerful for your brand, and you should be taking advantage of that. It's free. Like you've gathered that information, get the most
done
you
the
can
work
out of it.
Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing. The FBI has an office of private sector coordinators, and every office has outreach people. And so you can actually, anybody anywhere can contact their local FBI office and say, hey, I would like a threat briefing on counterintelligence. And they will send someone out. Sure. And it will cost you nothing. And they will brief you on, here's what it is in this area. Like the threat in Huntsville is not the same as the threat in New York or the threat in San Antonio. But those agents in those offices will come to you and say, okay, here's what it looks like for us. And then you know who your local point of contact is. So if you have a problem, you're not in the midst of the problem figuring out who we call now. You know, you have that point of contact. You can contact them if you do have a problem down the road.
Well, this went by so fast. I get to chat with you very infrequently, but I do always appreciate it. So, Dom, and first off, I really, really appreciate having you here, Darren. You are a wealth of knowledge and somebody that I would not want to fight against as an adversary for sure. So it's great to have you on. Thank you so much. Dom, if you want to close us out, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. This has been a fantastic show, and definitely some topics you should explore, dive into, learn, and use those resources. But with that, that's our show for this week. But the housekeeping,
I do want to add in
don't
one more
have to
thing,
advertise.
Darren is also contactable on LinkedIn. He had his profile there.
Yes,
he does consulting. He does speaking engagements.
down there.
He's probably one of the best at it that I know. So I just wanted to make a plug there. I don't do that very often, but check him out. Connect with him.
100%. Well, that's our show for the week. I don't have to give you the Beyond pitch anymore because we had it. It was fantastic. If you missed it, make sure you do come next year. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe, catch the game weekly on Fridays. Catch Technically Unraveled weekly on Thursdays and catch Academy Live weekly on Tuesdays, always on demand. We will see you next week.